In this screencast, I will show you how to monitor a SNMP device with the example of a pfSense firewall with EventSentry. We're going to monitor basic system health metrics such as CPU and memory utilization, in addition to SNMP counters that are specific to pfSense. Now, before we start configuring EventSentry, we want to make sure that the SNMP capable device, in this case the pfSense firewall, is actually capable and configured to be pulled by SNMP. So I'm going to open up the web browser in the web interface for the pfSense firewall, and we can see the dashboard here. And the SNMP configuration of a pfSense firewall is located in the services menu. Keep in mind this is for version 2.3 of pfSense. So if you click on services, we'll see the SNMP menu entry. We'll go there, and we'll see that by default SNMP is actually disabled. There's not a lot to configure for pfSense here. The default polling port is 161. That's the default for SNMP. The community string here is public, so we'll just leave that as is for this example. On your network, you'll want to pick something a little more secure, even though SNMP version 2 is not very secure to begin with. But I definitely recommend picking something other than public. We'll leave all the SNMP modules activated here, but we will change the bind interface. So this is which port the SNMP daemon will be listening to incoming requests, and we don't want this to be open on the WAN side, so we're going to change this to LAN. That means only internal hosts will have access to query the firewall for SNMP information. So again, we'll leave public in place here. We'll leave the system location contact empty as well, but I'd recommend that you fill that in as well on a production firewall. And then we'll just click the box here to enable, and we'll save the configuration. With the pfSense firewall, there is no restart necessary, but you could click this little circle error here in case the settings don't go into effect after checking the box and clicking the apply button. So let's minimize this and go into the EventSentry management console. EventSentry has the network devices group added by default. Of course, you can change it and organize it in any way you would like, but for this demo we're going to add the firewall to the network devices group here. So I'm going to go to the ribbon, hit the add button, specify the host name, in this case it's firewall, and give it the IP address. In this case that's this IP address here. If you have DNS resolution in place, which in most cases you will, you do not have to specify an IP address. So that's optional. This is if you don't have DNS in place, or if this host is not listed in DNS, or if you want to override it and customize it in EventSentry. I'm going to click OK, so the firewall is now in the group. The next thing we'll want to do is assign authentication. Now, EventSentry will by default always use the public community name if no authentication is configured. If we wanted to set our own authentication, then we would do that with the Set Authentication button. And how it works is very simple. You essentially create credentials and then assign them to a group or a host. So if we wanted to set up a authentication entry for this firewall, we could say authentication name public, because that's ultimately the username and password. Specify public here as the community name. If you're using SNMP version 3, then you have additional settings options here. Then you would just say add, and add this as an account, and then this account will be automatically assigned to the firewall host. So if you click OK here, you will see that a little key appears. Those SNMP credentials are now assigned to the firewall. To clear this again, we can hit the clear button. The account remains active, so it can still be assigned to some other device, but it will be cleared from the firewall. Like I mentioned earlier, there's no need to create authentication credentials for public. EventSentry uses that by default. So we're going to go ahead and see if we can reach this host, if we can actually query it via SNMP. So we're going to click the check status button here and hit go. And success. EventSentry will show us the device ID description. I'm going to maximize this field here a little bit. It shows us the version and some other information about the underlying FreeBSD operating system. So now that we have the host added here, the next thing we want to do is we want to first make sure that we collect the basic system metrics from that host, but then also monitor pfSense specific counters. We're going to do all that from the system health area here. You'll notice we have a performance system package here. So this performance system package is responsible for monitoring basic operating system metrics, including CPU memory and such. Any counter that's listed with SNMP here includes SNMP information and can be used on non-Windows devices. This is a global package, so there's really nothing that we have to do in this case. This will automatically be applied to our firewall, so there's nothing we'll have to do. So just hitting the save button right now, with the host added and with this package being global, will tell the EventSentry Heartbeat agent, the component that actually does the monitoring of non-Windows devices, to monitor this device and use the rules from the performance system package. Now EventSentry includes a package just for pfSense. It includes a handful of counters that are specific for pfSense. So how do we get these counters? If you click on packages here or in the ribbon, you'll notice that we'll have a few options here for managing packages. And we're going to click the import button here. And when you click import, you want to make sure that you're in the resources subdirectory of your EventSentry installation. So by default, I'm going to expand this here a little bit. That's going to be in the C program files x86 EventSentry resources folder. So here we have a number of packages. What we want to open up or import is the health SNMP package. So we're going to click open here, and we're presented with the import details dialog that shows us a number of devices for which EventSentry provides default rules. We can see that pfSense is listed, and that's the type of device that we want to support. And then we'll just click the import now button now. So we're going to go back to system health, so it looks like it was imported. And if we scroll down, we'll see a pfSense package. This package is light gray because it's not assigned. So the first thing we want to do now is we want to assign it to our firewall. So we're going to navigate and check the box next to our host. And the package is now assigned. Expanding the package shows that it includes a performance SNMP object and will further show us how many counters can be monitored with this package. So there's 4 in there, most of them related to the state table as well as the countermatch counter. So let's take a look at this here. We'll see here that we have an SNMP counter defined with a path to the OID, a descriptive name, so you pick this name. This is in fact the name of the object per pfSense, but you could put anything in here, a more descriptive name if you would like. There's no alert configured, but you could configure an alert here and say if this value exceeds a certain threshold, you want an alert to be logged. And it is by default being logged to the database. I'm going to change the interval here to 1 minute just for testing purposes so we can collect data more quickly. Collecting the data every 10 seconds seems reasonable, so we'll leave that in place. And we'll do the same thing for the other counters here. Now, if you'll want to resolve the OIDs that you see here, you'll notice that the OIDs are here not being resolved, that we just see the enterprise ID 12325 here in a number and followed by more numbers. Well, that's because we don't have the MIB for pfSense loaded. Generally, that's not a problem because we have the descriptive name here, so you'll know what this counter is. If that's something that bothers you, because you want to see the actual full path resolved, we'll have to load the MIB for the pfSense firewall. We can do that, so we're done here for now. And we can do that in the Network Services SNMP Trap Daemon area here. So this serves for the configuration of the trap daemon as well as for other components, as well as for performance monitoring by SNMP. So here we have a number of MIBs listed. This is the bare essential that you'll want when monitoring non-Windows devices by SNMP. But we can add the pfSense MIB here, and here we'll need to select the MIB files that are required for the device. The hardware or software manufacturer will usually tell you which MIBs you'll need and will also supply you with those MIBs. Since this is an open source project, you'll have to do that research online. In this case, I know which MIBs are required. First, I'm going to change this to all files since the extensions are a little bit different. So the first thing we'll need the focus MIB, and then we'll need the MIBs, and I'm going to change this to all files again, and we'll need these two MIBs as well. So now we have these 3 additional MIBs listed, and if we go back now to System Health, to the pfSense, and we double click the pfState table count again, we'll see now that the actual proper names are now being displayed here. If we want to test and make sure that the counter actually exists on the remote device and works, then we can hit the test button here and select a host from the list. So now you can essentially apply this counter to this device, and EventSentry, the management console, will now contact the remote host and try to retrieve that information, and we can see that it works. So first it showed us the system description so that we know which device it's talking to, and now you have the values that it's been receiving. So the average is 19 for the table count, and then the minimum and the maximum and the last value. So that's a great way to immediately see, okay, does this counter actually exist on the remote host? So we'll click OK. We'll assume that the other ones exist too, and save the configuration. Just a quick information on the architecture here. It's the heartbeat agent that actually goes out and pulls these non-Windows devices for their SNMP counters. So it's important to make sure that the monitoring interval that you've set here, and by default that's 60 seconds, and you'll want to make sure that that interval is lower than your actual counter intervals. So for example, if you remember going back to that pfSense counter here, we have it configured to check every 10 seconds, but our main heartbeat interval is actually 60 seconds. So we can reduce that, and we can say, alright, let's reduce this to 20 seconds. And that's completely reasonable considering that we only have a small number of hosts here that we're monitoring. And we can make certain adjustments here as well. And I can see here that we have a little typo here with the last counter that's set to 1 second. So 1 second is reasonable for Windows counters where the agent is pulling the local counter locally. 1 second is not a problem. It's definitely a low interval, but it's okay. But for remote firewall, that's not something that you'll want to do, is to go out to that device every second and get that counter. So something a little higher, 5, 10 seconds, 20 seconds every minute or so is usually sufficient. So now we have this set to 20 seconds. We're going to write to the database every minute. And yeah, I'm going to save the configuration again. I'm going to check out the application event log. And the heartbeat agent here actually tells us that a new configuration was applied successfully. So that's how you can verify and make sure that the heartbeat agent is actually picking up the changes. So let's go to the web reports and see if we're collecting any data there. All the performance and SNMP data is in the performance section. So we'll head over to status here. We'll click show all. And we have our firewall listed, so that's already a good sign. And here we have the status table, so we'll see here, okay, we've got a few entries here. The one counter that had a really low value is not listed yet. That's going to show up in a little bit. But we already have the main 3 counters here, the table count, inserts, and removal. We've got the CPU utilization, and we also have the network utilization. And if we look down here, we can see that the table, the SNMP OIDs are properly being resolved. So let's take a look at the details. This is just the overview here. So the number here next to network utilization, number 4, here just means that we have 4 different instances, one for each network interface. So let's click on detailed, and here are our first values. The current number of entries in the state table is 30. There's no inserts or removals. As you add more hosts and as you have more hosts between the firewall and the internet, the table count is going to increase. The CPU utilization is low at this point. And then we can click this little button here to bring us straight to the charts, the trends page. So we don't have a lot of data yet, so I'm going to switch this to minute. And of course, we'll just pick today here. Yeah, so far we have 3 entries. So we've had 29 entries here, and now we have 30 entries. So I've generated some traffic here in the meantime from a different host. And we can see that the state table count now increased drastically. And all it did really was just access a few sites on the internet with the web browser. So you can see that this kind of really nicely shows us how many connections there are on the firewall. But again, this is just one example of what you can do. We can switch, of course, down here to the table removals and inserts. So we can see that during this particular time here, a lot of entries were removed from the table. And if we look at the inserts the other way around, we can see that a lot of inserts were taking place at the time at around 10:48. We can also take a look at the CPU utilization and of course compare these values. So if you wanted to see multiple counters side by side, you can enable this switch here and click multiple values here. So if we scroll down here, we'll see the table count again, which is dropping now since there is no activity on the remote host anymore. We can unselect the CPU again and compare the overall table count with the inserts and the removals. So we'll display all 3 of them here. You can see here that the number of inserts, of course, is now decreased, whereas the number of removals from that table are increasing as these connections are dropping. In the overall, like I mentioned earlier, the overall table count is also going down. And that's really how easy it is to monitor a device with EventSentry. Of course, assuming that we ship configuration with it. If EventSentry does not include rules for the device that you want to monitor, please contact support. Or if you know which rules are needed, please don't hesitate to send those rules to us, and we can incorporate those rules into EventSentry so that other users can also benefit from that and can monitor that device out of the box with as little effort as possible. Before I end this screencast, I want to show you how you can incorporate a counter like this onto the dashboard. We have a default dashboard here that already contains a lot of information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new dashboard. I'm going to do this by clicking Change and Edit. I'm going to call this Network. Hit Create. I'm going to make this a dark dashboard. I'm going to add a tile. I'm going to add a cage as a number. We're going to switch this over to Elite Performance. We're going to select the firewall. And we're going to select table count here. There was no instance. And we'll just call this state table count. I'm going to refresh it every minute. Now we can see that counter here. We can also add a trend. Works the same way. We can put that right next to that counter. And why don't we map from the firewall here, table inserts Make it an area. And make it every minute. We'll hit save. And now we can see the inserts here. And of course you can visualize it in many different ways. So if you prefer a different visualization, for example, you can use a meter here and display the same information. Basically pick performance again, pick firewall, pick the table count. The max count here defaults to 100. So if you know that the max number you usually see is 1,000, for example, then you can do that too. And the number just changed because the table count is going down. If you hit refresh here, we'll see that the number is now 57. So there's a lot of ways you can visualize this. You can create multiple dashboards here, and they show up in the menu here. You can pick them real easily. Include charts, include gauges, and so forth, and create your own dashboards for different scenarios. A dashboard for Windows, a dashboard for security, networking, etc., etc. Again, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for watching.